The gavel came down before I even finished my sentence. "The court finds sufficient cause to proceed," Judge Harmon said, and just like that, 3 years of my life became evidence in a case I never asked to be part of. I remember exactly what I felt in that moment, not fear, not confusion, but something sharp and clarifying, like a blade finding its edge. Because sitting across the courtroom from me, in the witness chair, was my girlfriend of 4 years. The woman I had bought a ring for. The woman whose name I had tattooed in small letters on my wrist when we were 26 and stupid and certain about each other. Camille. She was looking at the prosecutor's table, not at me, and I understood then that she had made a choice she believed I would never recover from. She was wrong. Let me take you back to the Tuesday morning this started, because that's where the real story lives. Not in the courtroom, not in the verdict, but in a Tuesday morning 3 weeks earlier when I found a text on Camille's phone that she'd forgotten to delete. We had been together since graduate school. Architecture school, specifically, where we met during a group critique in second year when she tore apart my design for a community library so elegantly that I fell in love with her on the spot. She had this way of seeing structure, the bones beneath the surface, that I admired more than anything. She was brilliant, careful, precise. I trusted her the way you trust the load-bearing walls of a building you designed yourself. We moved in together after graduation. I built a small but growing firm, No Avance Architecture, with 2 partners and a handful of residential clients who had started referring us to their networks. Camille worked for a larger firm downtown, one of the prestigious ones with a name on the glass that meant something in this city. We weren't rich but we were stable. We were building something. Her ex's name was Derek Calloway. I knew about Derek the way you know about a scar on someone you love, you see it, you understand it. Happened, you don't press it unnecessarily. They had dated for 2 years before Camille and I met. He was a contractor, mid-level, ambitious in a way that sometimes crossed lines. Camille had told me, early in our relationship, that things ended badly with him. She said he had borrowed a significant amount of money from her and paid back none of it. She said he had a temper. She said she was grateful to be out of it. I believed her. Why wouldn't I? Derek had floated in and out of the periphery of our industry over the years. We worked in overlapping circles, construction, architecture, property development, so his name came up occasionally. I didn't love it, but adults manage these things. I was never threatened by him because Camille had been so clear about how she felt. Or so I thought. The text I found that Tuesday morning was from Derek, and it wasn't new. It was from a thread that went back 9 months. 9 months of messages while Camille slept next to me every night. I hadn't been snooping. I want to be completely clear about that. Her phone was on the kitchen counter. Unlocked, because she'd been showing me a photo of a project site the night before and left it face up. When she went to shower, a message preview lit the screen. I glanced, anyone would have glanced. And the name Derek stopped my hand before my brain caught up. I read the thread. All of it. Standing in my kitchen in running clothes I'd put on to go to the gym, going nowhere. The messages were not innocent. They were not friendly professional catch-ups. They were 9 months of Camille telling Derek she missed him, missed what they had, reassuring him that her feelings had never fully left. They were logistics, when and where. They were affection I recognized, because she had given identical versions of it to me. There were photographs I will not describe. There were future plans discussed in the comfortable tones of people who believe they have infinite time. And scattered throughout, woven into the fabric of it, were references to a situation Derek was in. Legal trouble. A dispute with a property developer named Philip Crane over a botched renovation contract. Derek, according to the texts, was worried about a lawsuit. Camille had been reassuring him. Telling him it would be fine. Telling him she would handle it. I'll take care of the timeline thing, she had written in a message from 6 weeks earlier. You just make sure your lawyer knows what to say. I've got the architectural side covered. I read that sentence 4 times. Then I set her phone down exactly where it had been, screen up, angle unchanged, and I sat at the kitchen table and I looked at the wall and I understood 3 things simultaneously. My girlfriend had been cheating on me for 9 months. My girlfriend was apparently involved in whatever legal situation Derek was navigating. And because of the second thing, I was potentially implicated in something I knew nothing about. I heard the shower turn off. I heard the glass door slide. I made a decision in the 30 seconds I had. Before she walked out, I would not confront her yet. Not until I understood what I was dealing with. Not until I had protected myself. That instinct, it turned out, saved me. When Camille came into the kitchen, towel around her hair, smiling at me the way she always did in the morning, open, warm, entirely convincing, I smiled back. I told her I was skipping the gym. I made us coffee. I sat across from her and watched her perform normalcy so flawlessly that I felt a secondary grief. Beneath the primary one, grief for how good she was at this, and how long I'd had no idea. "You okay?" she asked at some point. "Just tired," I said. "Long week." She reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. "We should go somewhere this fall. Just us. I've been wanting to get away." "Let's plan something," I said. I went to my office that morning and called my attorney, a former college friend named James Chen who had done our firm's incorporation and a few contracts. I told him I needed to speak with him privately. I told him I may have stumbled onto something that could involve me without my knowledge. He told me to come in at noon. In James's office, I walked him through the text thread. I had photographed every screen before I left the apartment, methodically, without disturbing the phone. He read through my screenshots slowly. When he finished, he sat back and folded his hands. "You've never had any professional contact with this Derek Calloway?" "None. I know who he is. We've been at the same industry events. That's it. And the Philip Crane project, you have no involvement." "I've heard Crane's name. He's a developer. I've never worked with him and I've never had any dealings with the renovation Derek apparently did for him." James nodded slowly. The reference to the architectural side, Camille works for Dalton Morris. Correct. He meant her firm. Yes. If she's been providing anything, testimony, documentation, reports, that touches on this dispute, and it misrepresents facts in any direction, that's significant. He paused. "Noah, I need to ask you directly. Is there any way your firm's name, your license, your certification comes up in any way related to this project?" I stared at him. "Why would it?" He turned his laptop to show me a filing he'd pulled. The Crane lawsuit was public record. I hadn't known about it, but it existed, had been filed 2 months ago. And there, in the listed documentation, referenced in the complaint, was a third-party architectural assessment, attributed, incorrectly, to a firm matching my credentials and a signatory name that was nearly, but not quite, my name. Someone had put me adjacent to this project on paper. Not close enough to be obvious. Just close enough to create confusion. Just close enough that if this went wrong, a name close to mine was attached to something problematic. I felt the cold fury settle in. Not the hot, immediate rage of betrayal that had already moved through me that morning in the kitchen. This was something colder and more focused. Structural, you might say. "What do I need to do?" I asked James. "Everything," he said. "We document your complete non-involvement. We pull every record. We establish your alibi, professionally. And we watch what happens next, because if this goes to hearing, someone is going to have to explain that attribution, and when they start pointing fingers, your name is positioned to be convenient." He was right. Within 10 days, I received a letter. I was being called as a potential witness in the Crane v. Calloway dispute. My architectural credentials had been mentioned in filings, and the plaintiff's legal team wanted to understand the scope of any third-party assessment tied to the project. I had never assessed that project. I had never set foot on it. But someone had created a document that suggested otherwise, and I was nearly certain I knew who had access to both the architectural certification language and the motivation to make it happen. I kept coming home to Camille every night. I kept making dinner with her and watching television with her and sleeping in the same bed. I felt nothing that resembled the love I'd had for her, that had been burned down completely in a single morning, but I was disciplined. I was building my case the same way I build anything, carefully, from the foundation up. During those 2 weeks, I spoke with James daily. I pulled every record from my firm, every project, every client contact, every site visit, with timestamps and correspondence. I was meticulous. I documented my complete distance from the Crane renovation in a way that was airtight. I also, quietly, made copies of the text thread I'd photographed. Multiple copies, stored separately. I wasn't sure yet exactly what they contained that would matter. But I knew they mattered. My allies assembled without me having to ask for all of them. My business partner, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Rita, noticed I was operating under stress and asked direct questions. I trusted Rita with everything. She became my unofficial investigator, using her own industry contacts to piece together Derek Calloway's actual conduct on the Crane project, the corners cut, the permits mishandled, the materials substituted below spec. She found people who had worked alongside him who were not happy with the situation. She documented. She shared everything with James. My friend Damon, who I'd known since undergrad, happened to know someone in the building department who confirmed that Derek's permit history showed a pattern of compliance issues. Nothing Criminal individually. Cumulatively, damning. What I was building, piece by piece, was not just a defense. It was the complete picture of what had actually happened, and what Camille's role in it had been. The hearing was scheduled. I was deposed by the plaintiff's attorney first, a sharp woman named Hargrove, who asked her questions quickly and watched my face for hesitation. I had none, because every answer I gave was true and documented. When she asked about the third-party assessment, bearing credentials adjacent to mine, I told her I had never produced it, never been contracted for it, and had documentation showing my complete professional history for the relevant period. She took the documents. She was quiet for a moment afterward. Mr. Vance, she said, are you aware of who may have produced this document? I have a strong suspicion, I said, which I'm prepared to share with appropriate parties at the appropriate time. I saw the corners of her eyes sharpen. She understood. On the evening before the hearing, I came home to find Camille on the couch with her laptop, working. She looked up and smiled that smile again. I had spent weeks watching her perform it and I still couldn't find the seam. Nervous about tomorrow? She asked. She knew about the hearing because I had told her, casually. As though it was merely an inconvenience. A case where my credentials had been incorrectly cited. She had expressed what sounded like sympathy. Not really, I said. I know exactly what happened. She looked at me for a half-second longer than normal. Something moved behind her eyes. Then she nodded and turned back to her screen. The following morning, in that courtroom, I watched Camille take the witness chair. She had not told me. She was being called as a witness. James had known, he'd seen the list, but we'd agreed not to tip our hand. She was called by Derek's defense team. I watched her settle into the chair with the composure of a professional woman who believes she is in control. She smoothed her blazer. She gave the bailiff a polite, measured look. And then she began to speak. What she testified to was precise, careful, and devastating in its intent. She described a professional relationship between Derek Calloway and a third-party architectural firm. She referenced documentation. She referred to credentials. She was calibrated to imply, without stating outright, that the assessment was legitimate and that the architectural sign-off had been genuine. She did not say my name. She didn't have to. The implication was structural, that the third-party review had been credible. And by extension, that Derek's work had received legitimate professional approval. She was testifying to protect him. And the shape of her testimony was designed to let a falsified document stand without directly defending the falsification. It was elegant and it was vicious and it was exactly what I would have expected from a woman as technically precise as Camille. I felt the gavel come down in my chest, not the courtroom's. Then it was my turn. James had orchestrated this with Hargrove's team over the past week. I was called not as a hostile witness but as a clarifying one. The plaintiff's team wanted the record clean. I walked to the witness chair with everything I'd built over the past 3 weeks organized in my mind the way I organize a building, load-bearing elements first. I established my credentials, my firm's history, my complete professional record. Then James asked me directly, had I ever been contracted for or performed any assessment on the crane renovation project? No, I said. I have never had any professional contact with that project. I have never met Philip Crane. I have never met Derek Calloway in a professional capacity. Are you aware that documentation referencing credentials similar to yours was submitted in these proceedings? I am. Can you speak to the origin of that documentation? I cannot speak to who created it, I said, but I can demonstrate, through my complete professional records, correspondence, and billing history, that it did not come from my firm or me. James admitted the records. Every one of them. My calendar. My invoices. My client correspondence. My site visit logs. 3 weeks of meticulous assembly. Then he handed me a tablet. On it were the photographs I had taken of Camille's text thread on that Tuesday morning. Mr. Vance, are you familiar with these messages? I am. I photographed them from a device that was left unlocked and accessible in my home on the morning of. I gave the date. Can you describe what they depict? I described them. I did not editorialize. I stated what they said, the 9 months of communication, the nature of the relationship between the parties, and specifically the messages in which Camille had discussed managing the architectural side of Derek's legal situation and had referenced coordinating with his legal team. The courtroom was not loud. It was the specific silence that rooms make when everyone in them is recalibrating. I watched Camille from the witness chair. She was still, the way buildings go still before they fail, that last moment before the structure gives. Her face had not changed but something beneath it had. She was looking at me now. I looked back at her steadily and I didn't feel anything that resembled anger. Which surprised me. What I felt was release. The clean, complete release of someone who has set down a weight they'd been carrying for weeks. Derek Calloway's attorney objected. Several things happened quickly. Judge Harmon reviewed the chain of evidence. James produced the metadata from the photographs confirming date, time, and device. The text thread was verified through the carrier records that James had subpoenaed 2 weeks earlier. I had not known about this part of his work, and I was grateful for it. The messages were admitted. Camille was recalled to the stand. Her attorney accompanied her now, which she hadn't had before. Which told you something. She declined to answer several questions on the advice of that attorney. The questions she declined to answer were the ones about what she had meant when she wrote that she had the architectural side covered, and what she had known about the documentation that had been prepared. Her refusal to answer was, in its own way, an answer. The hearing recessed. In the hallway, Camille found me, or rather, she placed herself in my path with the precision of someone who has rehearsed the moment. Noah. Her voice was very controlled. Don't, I said. You have to understand. Camille. I looked at her directly. She was beautiful and I had loved her genuinely, and none of that mattered at all anymore, which was the strangest feeling I had ever had. There is nothing you can say in this hallway that changes anything. Not for the case. Not for us. You made your choices. I made mine. She looked at me and I saw it then, not remorse, not exactly, but the first real crack in the performance. The moment when the person behind the architect realizes the building has already come down. You photographed my phone, she said, and it came out like an accusation. Your phone was unlocked on my kitchen counter, I said. I read what was visible. You made that possible. She opened her mouth and closed it. I hope Derek was worth it, I said, and walked back into the courtroom. The legal outcome took another 6 weeks to fully resolve. The falsified documentation was investigated. Dalton Morris, Camille's firm, launched their own internal review when the text messages became part of the public record. Derek Calloway settled with Philip Crane for a significant sum. The details were not disclosed, but Damon heard a number through someone he knew in construction finance that made both of us wince. Derek's contractor license faced review proceedings. Camille was placed on administrative leave pending the internal investigation at her firm. I learned this from Rita, who had contacts there. I did not check on it myself. I noted it the way you note weather changing. It registers, it doesn't move you. I had moved out of the apartment the day after the hearing. I arranged it while Camille was at work, or wherever she was, since she was on leave by then. I took what was mine, my drafting equipment, my books, the cast iron pen I'd had since I was 22, the ring I'd never given her, which I drove directly from the apartment to a jeweler and sold. I left her key on the kitchen counter where her phone had been on that Tuesday morning. I thought about that symmetry for a moment and then I left. My firm's name was formally cleared in the case record. Judge Harmon noted explicitly that the third-party documentation had been produced without my involvement and that my credentials had been misappropriated. James filed a formal complaint with the licensing board on my behalf regarding the misuse of my professional information. It was documented, official, and permanent. I found an apartment on the east side of the city, smaller than what I'd had but with good light and a view of a small park. I set up my drafting table by the window. I ran every morning, longer routes than before. I slept deeply in a way I hadn't in months, maybe longer. I hadn't realized how much ambient tension I'd been carrying in that apartment until it was gone. Rita, without being asked, told our firm's clients what had happened at the most relevant level of detail. That my credentials had been misused in a legal proceeding and that the matter had been formally resolved in my favor, with the record reflecting my complete non-involvement. Several clients reached out personally to express support. One, a property developer I'd worked with for 2 years, sent a formal letter that his attorney prepared attesting to the integrity of our professional relationship. Unprompted. I kept that letter. It meant something. Damon took me to dinner the week after I moved out. We went to the restaurant we'd been going to since we were graduate students who ordered the cheapest things on the menu and now ordered whatever we wanted, and he let me be quiet for most of the meal, which was why we'd been friends for so long. You knew, he said at one point. When you first found the phone, you knew this was going to get complicated and you handled it instead of panicking. I almost panicked, I said. But you didn't. No. He nodded. What do you feel now? I thought about it. Quiet, I said. I feel very quiet. Camille did not contact me directly after I moved out. For 3 days, she didn't. Then a message arrived. Through what I can only describe as the formal, measured tone of someone who has spoken to a lawyer. About what they can and cannot say. She expressed regret for what had happened. She said she had not intended for me to be implicated in anything. She said she had found herself in a situation that escalated beyond her control. I read it once and did not respond. A week later, a longer message. More personal. She referenced our years together, specific memories. The ring she must have noticed was gone. She said she had made the worst mistake of her life. She said Derek had pressured her into things she wouldn't have done otherwise. She said she knew I wouldn't forgive her and she wasn't asking for forgiveness, only understanding. I read that one twice. Then I forwarded it to James in case it was relevant and did not respond. The third message came a month later, after her firm had completed their investigation and her employment had been formally terminated. It was brief. It said, I don't expect anything from you. I just want you to know that I know what I destroyed, and I will live with that. I did not forward that one to James. I also did not respond. I read it standing at my window looking at the park, and I felt the quietness inside me that Damon had asked about, steady and unbroken, and I moved on with my evening. Derek Calloway I did not hear from directly, which was wise of him. His contractor license was suspended. Pending review. The settlement with Crane had depleted significant resources. A trade publication that covers construction and development in our city ran a piece about the case, without naming me directly, but noting that third-party documentation had been found to have been fabricated with misappropriated credentials. The piece was circulated in the industry. Derek's name was in it. That was enough. I ran into someone who knew him casually, 3 months after everything had resolved, at an industry event I'd almost skipped. She mentioned Derek without knowing my history with the situation and said he'd been having a rough time and had lost a few major relationships. She seemed to think this was sad. I offered nothing and changed the subject. What I was learning, in those months, was something I'd known intellectually but not viscerally, that the people who betray you with the most conviction are usually the ones who were most convinced, at some point, that they could control the consequences. Camille had believed she could manage the legal situation, manage Derek, manage me, manage the story. She had been wrong not because she was incapable, she was one of the most capable people I'd known, but because she had miscalculated one thing. She had believed that I would be passive. She had looked at 4 years of me being steady and trusting and supportive and mistaken it for compliance. She thought that I would absorb what happened, be confused by it, and not move quickly or precisely enough to change the outcome. That miscalculation was everything. 6 months after the hearing, Noah Vance Architecture won a commission we'd been competing for against 4 larger firms, a mixed-use development in the Arts District that was the biggest project in our history. Rita cried when we got the call. I did not cry, but I sat very still for a few minutes afterward, feeling the weight of what we'd built together. We hired 2 new architects. We moved into a larger studio. My professional reputation, which Camille had inadvertently put in proximity to risk, had emerged not just intact but clarified. Judge Harmon's explicit finding was a matter of public record. Several people in the industry who had seen the case mentioned to me, in the months that followed, that it had actually served as a kind of credential, proof that I had handled an impossible situation with precision and integrity. I hadn't thought about it that way. But I accepted the acknowledgement. The ring money I had put in a separate account. I used it, eventually, to buy a piece of art for the new studio, a structural drawing by an architect I'd admired since school, framed and hung in the main workspace where everyone could see it. It seemed like the right transformation. Something that had been intended for one purpose, redirected into something that would last. I started running longer. I started cooking more, the meditative kind of cooking where you're working with your hands and your mind is free. I read books I'd been meaning to read for years. I slept well. Deeply, consistently. I was not unhappy. This was something I had to consciously recognize, because there is a story we tell ourselves about how long grief should last, about how long the aftermath of betrayal should shadow your days. The shadow was present, but it was not consuming. I was, actually, all right. 8 months after everything, I was at a project consultation, a residential client in the hills, a house I was genuinely excited about, full of light and angles I'd been thinking through for weeks, when I met the client's colleague, a structural engineer named Vera who had been brought in to consult on the site. She asked sharp questions, had strong opinions she expressed directly, and caught an error in my preliminary calculations before I had. We got coffee afterward to finish a conversation we'd started on site. The coffee became dinner. I was honest with her, early. I told her I'd come through a significant betrayal recently and that I was not rushing anything, and that I wanted to be clear about that. She said she appreciated the directness and that she'd been hurt badly before too, and that she understood exactly what I meant. We took it slowly. It was nothing like what I'd had before, not in the specifics, but in the quality of it. There was no performance. There were no seams to find. When something was wrong she said so, and when something was good she said that too, and I did the same, and the steadiness of it was so different from what I had lived with that I had to consciously not compare them, because the comparison made the contrast too sharp. I am not going to tell you that she replaced what I lost. You cannot replace what you lose. What you can do is build something new in the space that loss creates, if you are willing to do the work and honest about what you're building. I was willing. I was honest. A year after the hearing, almost exactly a year, because life sometimes has that kind of precision, I was at an opening for a development project our firm had done preliminary consultation on. I was with Vera. The building was beautiful, which always gave me a specific and private satisfaction. We were in conversation with a group of people when I looked across the room and saw Camille. She saw me at the same moment. She looked diminished in a way that was not about clothing or hair but about something internal, the specific collapse of someone who has been living with consequence for a year. She had lost her position at Dalton Morris. I knew from various industry contacts that she had not found equivalent work. She was consulting, freelancing, rebuilding slowly in a landscape where her name carried a complicated association. She looked at me. Then she looked at Vera, and I watched her understand. She started toward me. I waited, because I had been waiting for this moment in some form for a year. And I knew what I wanted to say. Noah. She stopped 2 feet away. Her voice was quiet in a way it hadn't been before, not composed quiet but hollowed out quiet. Camille. She looked at Vera again briefly and then back at me. You look well. I am, I said. She nodded slowly. She was working up to something and I let her work. I have thought about reaching out so many times, she said finally. I never knew what to say. That's because there isn't anything to say, I said. Not cruelly. Just accurately. I know. She pressed her lips together. I need you to know that I never meant for you to be hurt by any of it. I know that sounds. Camille. I said her name gently, the way you would put down something heavy. The intent doesn't change what happened. You testified in a way that allowed falsified documents bearing my credentials to stand. Whether you intended to harm me or not, you made a choice that could have destroyed what I'd built. You chose Derek over me. In a courtroom. She looked down. He's gone, she said. It's over. It's been over for months. She stopped. I know, I said. I heard. What I'd heard was that Derek, stripped of his license and settlement depleted, had moved to another city. Camille had been left with the professional and reputational consequences of what she'd helped construct and none of the relationship she'd constructed it for. That particular justice had a clean architectural logic that I had not engineered. It had simply resolved by its own structural weight. I'm sorry, she said. I know it doesn't. I know you're sorry, I said. And I want you to understand something. I don't hold anger toward you anymore. I moved through that. This was true. The anger had burned fast and hot in those first weeks, and had been replaced by something that fueled more useful things. What I have for you now is just nothing. Not contempt, not residual feeling. Just nothing. And I think that's the appropriate distance. She absorbed this. I watched her understand that nothing was worse than anger, because anger is still a connection. Nothing is finished. I hope you rebuild well, I said, and I meant it, the way you mean it when you say it to someone you're entirely done with. Then I turned back to Vera and the conversation and the room and the building full of light, and I didn't look back. Vera took my hand on the way out, not asking what had just happened. She knew, roughly, the shape of the story. We walked out into the evening and I looked up at the building we were leaving, the way I always do with buildings, assessing what works, what the architect got right, what I might have done differently. That was her, Vera said. Not a question. Yes. You okay? Completely, I said, and it was the simplest and most accurate thing I had said in a long time. 2 years from that Tuesday morning in the kitchen. 2 years from the morning that everything I thought I was building collapsed and I realized, standing at the rubble, that the structure had been compromised at the foundation for nearly a year without my knowledge. 2 years, and what I have now is a firm with our name on real work in the city. A studio filled with light and good people. A life that is genuinely mine, not half-constructed around someone else's secrets. My professional record carries, formally and permanently, a judicial finding of complete non-involvement. And no misconduct. The misuse of my credentials is documented as originating elsewhere. When anyone In the industry looks up my name, what they find is a clean record and, if they look further, the public record of a case in which I was implicated without my knowledge, cleared with precision, and the fabrication traced elsewhere. Some people in business would consider this a shadow. I have come to consider it a credential. I still have the photographs from Camille's phone. I keep them not because I need them, the case is long resolved, but because they are the specific evidence of the one morning when everything shifted. The morning I decided not to react but to act. Not to be passive but to be precise. Every time I've wanted to build something worth keeping, that's the morning I come back to in my mind. Not the courtroom. Not the confrontation, but the kitchen. The locked phone. The decision to think before I spoke, to plan before I moved, to build my case the way I build everything. From the foundation up. Noah Vance Architecture is currently designing 7 projects. We have a waiting list for the first time. Rita announced last month that she wants to expand into a second city and has asked me to lead the new office. I told her I'd think about it, which both of us know means yes. I heard, through the specific quiet industry channels that carry this kind of information, that Camille got a position at a smaller firm 6 months ago. Consulting work, not the senior role she had before. I received this information, noted it, and thought nothing further about it. I have not thought about Derek Calloway since the month the case resolved. He is a name in a closed file. The park outside my apartment has turned full autumn. I run past it every morning, different routes. Always returning. The coffee shop near the studio knows my order. Vera designed a support structure for a project she said I will find elegant when I see it built, and based on her track record I believe her. I bought a new ring. Not for anyone in particular. For when the moment exists. It is in my drafting desk in the small drawer where I keep things that matter, my grandfather's compass, the letter from my client. The first drawing I made of something that actually got built. The text message thread from Camille's phone, those screenshots, are in a folder I rarely open. They served their purpose. They will stay where they are. Every so often someone in the industry who knows the story mentions it, carefully, the way people mention things they find instructive. How I handled it. The precision, the patience, the outcome. They ask me what I would tell someone in a similar situation. I tell them what I know about structures. I tell them, before you tear anything down, document what was there. Understand the load-bearing elements. Know what you're working with before you make your move. And then make it clean.